Welcome everyone into the Go 24/7 on location. No more StreamYard.
No,
It's me and you next to each other. We haven't done this in quite a while, Glenn.
it feels like last football season when we were up on the bleachers at Alabama, trying to just find a little spot where we could record our final reactions to that game. Wasn't as fun of an experience, I must say, as this one was today. This was a very fun SEC media days for LSU. So lots we can learn from today.
Yeah, and we're on a comfy couch. Way
Yes.
better than standing on those bleachers.
On a different floor than where everything is, because there's just so many people up there. It's hard to kind of get anything
Done in general, yeah.
Yes.
But hey, we're here in Dallas, SEC Media Days. My name's Bryce Koon. He is obviously Glen West. We appreciate you tuning in. Glenn, we got the chance. Brian Kelly, they literally just got off the podium. First off, shout out to the SEC. 2 years in a row, Brian Kelly and LSU, first ones to go. It makes our lives a little bit easier. But just kind of some of your overall thoughts. I know we mentioned Harold Perkins being here. I mean, that was obviously of note. We only got to talk to him maybe once, maybe twice last season. And Perkins had some things to say and showed off a little bit of his personality and the suit that he was wearing, Mason Taylor, Garrett Nussmeier. But just maybe some of the big overarching takeaways from LSU.
Yeah, I mean, I was really impressed with Mason Taylor. I mean, they brought him in, and I was a little surprised that maybe surprised isn't the right word, but I was a little, just I thought that they would bring one of the offensive linemen.
Yeah,
I thought
Will Campbell would have been.
Will Campbell or Emory Jones. But I think what it really shows me, and it really shows what LSU fans should be looking forward to in this offense, is that he's going to be a featured piece in this offense. I'm really excited to see how they utilize him. Brian Kelly has a history with tight ends. He talked about it today with the media scrum with us before they took the podium, just about how he knows an NFL tight end when he sees one, and he thinks that Mason Taylor can absolutely be that piece for LSU. The only problem is he was playing behind 3 first-round picks this year, and so are these past couple of years. So he just didn't have the chance to be featured. And I think what you saw really in that bowl game too is that they have a nice rapport. Him and Nussmeier have a really nice rapport. I think they combined for 7 or 8 catches in that game. So he's somebody that I'm really excited to see kind of interwoven into this offense. And he gave some really good answers today. We asked him just kind of what this offense could potentially look like in 2024 or 2020. Yes, 2024. I don't know why I'm looking ahead to 2025, but and he was just really complimentary of the job that Joe Sloan and Garrett Nussmeier have done. Certainly, this offensive line I think is going to be a huge crux in terms of the identity of this group and how they want to move this offense forward without having your Heisman Trophy winner and 2 first-round receivers last year. So I'm very excited to see kind of how he's implemented into this offense. I thought Brian Kelly gave some really fun answers today too, and very laid back, kind of 15-20 minutes with him before he took the main stage. I think probably one of the answers that really stood out to me was when he was talking about Harold Perkins and why he wanted to bring Harold Perkins to this event in particular. And we had our suspicions. I remember when they first announced it and we were kind of doing our reactions or kind of our SEC previews. I mentioned the fact that I think it shows us that Harold is a leader of this group and that he's going to be a huge central piece. And we knew that coming in, but I think that Brian Kelly really wanted to hammer home the fact that this is a really good personality, a really good player, a really good guy to be around. His teammates respect him. He obviously is going to be a huge part of what they want to do on the field this year. And I was really interested to see kind of how he would do, and I thought he held his own. I thought he did some really good. He had some really nice answers, and just kind of how they want to use him, how he views himself at the next level, and obviously moving into that inside linebacker role. So those were a couple of the standouts to me.
Yeah, and to kind of play off that, I mean, you mentioned Mason Taylor. I joked with him. I said, "What's it feel like to be a veteran on this team?" And he said it's kind of gone quickly, and they have a young tight end room, a lot of talent, and he said, that he feels good. I think this is kind of a telling point about where this position is after he leaves, and we talked about this last week. Is he a guy that could have a monster season, maybe leave after his junior year? Maybe. But the guys behind him, like we've talked, Trades Green just got there. Kamorian Pimpton is another guy, that we still like to see, continue to realize his potential, and a bunch of other names too. I just think that position is continuing to mold where Brian Kelly wants it, and Kelly said as much and Taylor said as much. They feel comfortable not just where they are in 2024 at the tight end spot, but just going forward, and I think that's huge. And then what you said about Perkins, I mean, adding the weight, and I think Kelly was really candid about the fact that you might want to play inside linebacker at 212, 215, but you really can't. And, it does beg the question, Glenn, that we went into last season, that Florida State game, you and I talked about it right afterwards. Harold Perkins had to make the decision, and Kelly said as much about how he wanted to not only be impactful this season, but as a lot of people and NFL draft experts think that this will be his final season at the college level, what's best for him in the future. And I don't know, I kind of got excited, hearing those things about, hey, he's really kind of dedicated himself, not just on the field, but academically as well, just making sure he does all the right things. And then, got the chance to talk with Perkins about and we'll have an article on this as well, about his relationship with Blake Baker. I think that's huge and something that they talked about, just not just being in the right spot, but the mindset that Baker and really this whole defensive staff that Kelly said there, he's pretty excited about.
Yeah, I mean, look, going back to the 2021, like one of the reasons that LSU had some success on defense in 2021 was Damone Clark and his ascension and his development under Blake Baker and just the player that he was before and after working with Blake Baker. And I remember Damone back in that season talking a lot about the devotion that he put into the film room. And that was a lot of what we heard from Harold today. Is like he's been in the film room a lot this offseason trying to figure out the mental side of the game and how he can, already know what's going to happen before it happens.
Yeah.
Like I think that's a huge part of playing at an elite level, especially when you're an elite athlete. So much, and we've said this before, but so much of what Harold has done these first 2 years, he's just going off instinct in his role that he's in. And what you saw in that one game last year against Florida State when he was a starter at inside linebacker, he was not going off instinct. He was very reactionary. And I think getting him to a position this year where he can be more instinctual in his play at inside linebacker is going to really elevate his play. It's going to elevate this defense's potential. And I think that really comes back to his what the work he's put in the film room. From what he said, from what Coach Kelly said, from what Blake Baker has said in interviews this offseason, I think that's a huge part of kind of his mentality and his development into being the kind of player that they all think he can be. So that was probably something that really stood out to me when talking with Harold and listening to his answers today, is just how much more confident he feels in film study. And he didn't really go into a ton of examples about how he's evolved in terms of studying film, but he's putting in that work. And when you see film enough times and you see it on the field enough, you do start to go off of more instinct and being able to use your athleticism to your advantage. And I think that's what we're going to see this year from Harold.
Yeah, it's not just the natural God-given ability. He's really kind of honing in, and I think it all kind of ties into this point I wanted to make about, Brandon Marcello asked the question, kind of kicked off a chain reaction of year 3. And look, we know, and I mentioned that. I think I joked on the pod last week, how long until we hear a year 3 question. But it does kind of talk when Kelly said this is probably the most accountable team that he has had. I think Harold Perkins was a great example of that, of like taking it on yourself to the coaches can only do so much. Now it's time for the players to be well prepared, and that maybe that communication factor that we heard was a disconnect last year. Kind of your thoughts on Kelly's comments about year 3 and that accountability factor.
Yeah, accountability and trust were the 2 words he used today pretty consistently. And look, accountability is something we've heard since day one, since he took his first press conference as LSU's head coach. But at the time, he also said it was going to take a while for them to get to a point where they felt like it was a fully accountable group. And I think they have enough, veteran leadership returning here to where that is the case. Like I think that you can make an argument that from a leadership perspective, from an accountability perspective, in terms of doing the right things on a daily basis, that this team is strong enough in that area to where they can certainly start to see some of those efforts on the field kind of flip a little bit. And you saw that last year with the offense. Last year's offense was a very accountable group. Those guys, they knew what they wanted going into the year, and they were able to go out there and they were able to do it. This year's offense, you got some of the same guys back, but some of the guys that weren't in those impact roles for the last 2 years are now going to be very much featured in this offense. So how those guys kind of elevate that side of things, I think is going to be really interesting. And then obviously the defensive side too. I mean, like you did not have a very accountable group last year. Let's just put it that way. Like they just were not in sync a lot last year in any respect. And so I think what you look to is the coaching staff and what these new defensive coaches might be able to do to help them get to that point. I think that work starts now in the offseason. It starts in the summer. It started back in the spring when they were putting in some of the macro ideas of what they wanted their defensive identity to be. So, we'll see kind of how that translates to the fall. I know everybody has their concerns, their questions, and this SEC Media Days was not going to answer any of them. They got to go out there and prove it on the field. So we'll see. TBD on the defense, but if they can start to get that accountability and trust more consistent on that side of the ball, then I think you're going to like the end result a little bit more than what you saw last year.
And kind of to that point on the other side of the football as we get ready to wrap this up, I mean, I know you talked with Nussmeier at the Manning Passing Academy, but one thing that really stood out to me is when Brian Kelly said he's not afraid to call out people, both on the offensive and the defensive side of the football. That's a leader. And don't want to mistake this for anyone or anyone to kind of misunderstand this. Jaden Daniels was a leader, albeit in a different way. More, I would say, leader by action. It feels like Nussmeier is a guy who's more vocal.
Yeah.
We saw, that hype video that had all of us ready to run through a brick wall for him, earlier in the summer. But just kind of, your thoughts as we wrap it up. Nussmeier as that vocal leader and how that maybe changes what this team can be, because I want to be careful. You covered Joe Burrow, and you obviously were a guy that you were able to kind of see, and obviously the stories coming out that he was vocal, was challenging the defense. What type of, not comparing the two, but what type of competition within practices can that create? Just with, hey, we're killing you, we're killing you, the defense, and now make them kind of step up.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think the confidence that Nussmeier has now is just a totally different thing. I mean, Coach, one of the other funny kind of side details there was that Coach Kelly made the analogy to a rental car versus owning a car. And how he compared the second string quarterback or being a second string quarterback to having rental cars, and like you don't put as much effort in as you would if you were a starter kind of deal.
Yes.
You don't take as good of care of a rental car as you would your own car. And I think now that he owns that car, he owns that starting job. He's seeing a different side of Garrett Nussmeier really come out, and very similar to how Burrow was back in 18 and 19 when maybe his play hadn't really been what it was at peak levels in 19. In 18, he really was, I think, starting to show himself as a leader of the team, and I think this year you're really starting, or at least this offseason, Nussmeier has said and done all the right things to get LSU into that position to be a successful group on and off the field. And he'll be one of the leaders. Emory Jones, Will Campbell, Mason Taylor, Harold Perkins. I think Jacobian Guillory is a good guy on the defensive line to really take that next step. Savion Jones is somebody you're hoping can take that next step as a leader. They have guys that are capable of doing it. I think what we have to really see here is how that leadership affects the play on the field, and how they kind of take that next step, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Offense, we don't think offense will be what it was last year, and I think
hard to replicate.
It's hard to replicate that, and that's nothing wrong with that. But this can still be a very good group, one of the top in the conference, in my opinion, if they get that development from guys like Kyron Lacey and Chris Hilton and C.J. Daniels and Mason Taylor and Caleb Jackson at running back. Like, there's enough pieces there to where you feel like this offense can be pretty good, and better than pretty good. Like, we're a really elite offense, but the defense is where this is all going to come back to. And can those guys make the improvement from being really, really poor to maybe mediocre to maybe slightly above average? Like, where do they fall on that little pendulum is going to be really telling to how they do this year and really kind of what kind of season they're going to have.
And just for the record, not comparing Garrett Nussmeier and Joe Burrow, but more of the mentality and saying right
and
things.
The things that they're saying in the offseason before they're like for instance, Burrow in the offseason at the Manning Passing Academy actually came out and said, we're going to average 60 points a game. That's a confident quarterback right there. And Nussmeier did not come out and say that at the Manning Passing Academy.
But the same type of confidence.
He showed his own confidence in his own way.
Yes.
And there's something to take out of that, I think, if you're an LSU fan watching and listening to what he's had to say this offseason. He's very much a quarterback's son. He's very well put together in terms of what he says, how he says it, what he wants his points to come across as. And that's a good kind of, I think, insight into how he acts in the locker room as well, and how he treats his teammates, and how he's demanding maybe to a point as a leader, but also understands that, like, we got to go in and we got to go to this war together kind of deal. And I think that's a big deal to have as a quarterback, is to have that power and to have that knowledge and confidence about your team and about your group.
Yeah, and I think that you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the confidence. It's his own version of it. It's not. He's not a results-based guy. He has made that very clear that it's more about the process and that. And look, those are all the right things to say. And one last note, Glen, folks, listen. Glen asked the question about the defensive line. And Coach Kelly proceeded to just list out names and talk about names that we've all talked about before.
We got 8 or 9 guys.
Yeah.
8 or 9 guys that can contribute. And, I think it was interesting that he threw out McKinley and Relaford, the 2 freshmen that I think you could see at that edge and D-tackle spots. He mentioned Parrish Shand. I'll be interested to see if they move one of those other defensive ends into
Savion
D-tackle.
Jones,
One of those guys into D-tackle, and at least on a rotational basis, not an every snap basis. But then I think they like what they have in terms of their rotation at DT. I mean, in terms of bodies. We got to stop it there. In terms of bodies, not proven experience.
Names on the roster.
Names on the roster. They like Jacobian. They like Gio Paez, the Wisconsin transfer. They like JVR Suggs.
Squatting 600, by the way.
Squat 600, yes. They think McKinley has a very bright future ahead. They have a couple other guys in there that I think they could be able to rotate in, but
we'll see.
I'm in that camp of yes. We'll wait and see. We'll just have to wait and see what it looks like. But they're in an okay spot, I think, bodies wise. It's just can you get those guys ready to play at an SEC level? And really, that first USC game is going to tell us a lot, because I do think the strength of USC is in their run game this year and the running backs they have. So it'll be a good first one to kind of see kind of where this defense is at and how far they need to go as a group.
Yeah, y'all catch Glen at the Bellagio Labor Day weekend for that big-time matchup. No, he's not staying at the Bellagio. But, hey, we do appreciate, obviously, here at the Omni Hotel in Dallas, LSU, the first one's up on the podium. A lot of good stuff that you can catch all that written content over at Go 24/7. And, Glen, I believe we're recording this on Monday afternoon. We're almost at the end of a great deal that people need to be able to take advantage of.
Yeah.
So make sure you check that out. We're going to have that down there in the link below. But make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and check us out on all podcast forums as well. He's Glen West. My name is Bryce Koon from Dallas, Texas. LSU takes the podium in a full SEC Media Day recap.